back. Maybe you heard something creaking in your basement. Maybe you thought you saw somebody walk past your room. Was it real, right? Was there really a ghost there? You know, for centuries, people all across the world have had ghostly encounters and such. And joining us now to talk more about this is Dr. and Professor Christine Simmonds-Moore, a professor of psychology specializing in parapsychological research. Let's talk about this. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So let's talk about this. Are ghostly encounters real, or is this just a figment of people's imagination?
Well, first of all, I'd say both. They're not mutually exclusive. I mean, they're very real to the person themselves. And sometimes imagination can act in very strange ways. So sometimes we can have things that are actually coming from our imagination that seem to kind of project out into space. And that's particularly likely under certain circumstances. For example, if we're sleepy, if we're in the half-light, if we have lost a loved one, we might be kind of thinking about them a lot, and then we're also sleep deprived. So lots of things like that. So it's kind of both real and not real.
Yeah, it seems though in our culture, at least now, we hear more about these ghostly encounters, especially when it comes to video. Is that because more people are pulling out their phones, or are these situations happening more often?
Well, I think we've always had ghost experiences. It's part and parcel of being human. But like you say, we do have cameras to hand, and so people are much more able to try to record these anomalous events. And so I think it's a bit of both. And again, like, camera footage does not equal a ghost. It equals an anomaly that we have to then try to explain. But yeah, so again, I think this is part and parcel of being human, and we see it in every single culture and across history.
In your research, because I'm sure you've had to research to get to the point where you are, have you had anybody that you've maybe studied, or any situation that you've studied that involved a ghostly encounter?
Well, actually, we've done some research here at University of West Georgia where we were actually trying to create a ghost, because people's stories are flawed. Memory is not like a camera. And so what we tried to do was have people in a chamber where they were trying to interact with a deceased loved one. And what we did was we looked at personality, we looked at the environment, we looked at geomagnetism, we looked at the body, and we were looking to see all the things that correlate with when people have an encounter. And so we also looked at random number generator, and that has been found to be associated with consciousness and ghosts in previous studies. So yeah, we were trying to see whether we could create that under lab situations, because stories are flawed. And people did have interesting experiences in the lab, and they do seem to correlate with personality, but also with the environment. And so there's something that seems to be an interaction between what people are wanting to experience, what's going on that we can't see, like geomagnetism, and certain personality types. So certain people are much more likely to have strange interactions between feeling something's in the room, and these kind of fluctuations in randomness that we shouldn't see. So we try to sort of systematically study it to make more sense, because a lot of the research has focused on, okay, I had this encounter, and you can't study it post hoc. You have to try and, as best you can, see what's happening when the experience is going on. And so the best way to do that is to create it, if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes sense. So when you were studying this person in this chamber, I'm assuming there were cameras watching the entire time to see if this deceased loved one would come back. Did anyone have that experience?
Mm-hmm. They did. And so we don't have footage of actual ghosts appearing on our camera, but we were looking for anomalies on the camera footage. And there were more sort of blobs when there was somebody sitting in the room compared to where there weren't. And there were more blobs that seemed to kind of relate to when there was non-randomness in the stream of random numbers that's supposed to be random. So we're sort of piecing it together, but there was not any pictures of ghostly figures on the camera, but there were weird things. I can also add that people who had encounters with their deceased loved ones were profoundly affected by it. So it's very, very meaningful for people to have these encounters. So, again, in contrast, the idea that ghosts are scary, these kind of encounters were very reassuring and allowed people an opportunity to say goodbye to their deceased loved ones. So, yeah, it's really interesting and sort of challenging for the idea that ghosts are scary.
Let me ask you this, because different people have different experiences when they grow up. Maybe religiously speaking, they grow up and in their family, they talk about ghosts. They talk about, their deceased loved ones coming back to life, or they had an encounter with a deceased loved one. Religious beliefs and kind of cultural differences. Did you find, or do you have research that proves that based on that alone, some people do have more ghostly encounters than others?
They absolutely do, yeah. So it's a really complex recipe. So we've got like cultural beliefs and personal beliefs that are interacting with experiences that people might have. And so if you grow up in a culture where it's okay to have a ghost encounter, or that the ancestors are watching over you, it's much more acceptable. And if something's more acceptable, we're more likely to report it, and we're more likely then to have those experiences overall. So one comparison is between, for example, Brazil and the US. So people in Brazil are much more likely to have those kind of ancestral beliefs, and so more likely to have ghost experiences overall. Whereas in the US, sometimes it's portrayed as being associated with poor mental health, or you see something that isn't there, and so people don't talk about it as much. But even within the US, like you say, like people who grow up in a household where it's okay, like great, your grandma's looking over you, you're much more likely to have that experience and accept it, and then perhaps have those experiences too.
It seems like in our culture right now, if you didn't get it on video, it didn't happen, right? Because I think for a lot of people, seeing is believing. In your research, in terms of the paranormal activity, are ghosts real? Has there been any video evidence or any situation that proves that ghosts do exist?
Well, it's very complicated because just an image on a camera could be many things, and human beings are very good at turning shadows into human faces and human shapes. That's what we do. You might play that game with your child. Look at the cloud. What do you see in the cloud? Or look in the tea leaves. So we're really good at that. And so, sometimes we get photos sent to us, or I get videos sent to me, and people say, "Oh, look, I've caught a ghost on my camera," and I say, "Well, okay, we can't tell whether this is a ghost by just looking at that picture. What you have to do is, like I said before, systematic investigation, and you sort of layer the evidence." And so, for example, if there is an anomaly on a camera that is in the same location where something has been seen compared to other locations, and where maybe lots of people have seen the same thing rather than different things, and even where something has been experienced that relates to events that actually did happen there, that is more interesting. So what we have to do is layer the evidence to sort of say whether something anomalous has happened. And then even then, as a psychologist and researcher, you have to be skeptical and but open-minded at the same time, and say, well, okay, something's gone on, and this is more likely to be anomalous than just a blob on a camera in itself. But you don't know whether it's necessarily a ghost per se, because also there's lots of different ways to understand ghosts and different types of ghosts too, if that makes sense. So it's complicated.
Yeah, it is complicated, but very interesting at the very same time. Professor Christine Simmonds-Moore, thank you so much for shedding light on this issue. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me. Have a good day.
You too. Okay, coming up, we are talking to Frank the Tank, who has lost over 220 pounds just by walking. You may know that name because he's part of Barstool. We'll have his story, and we'll talk to him right after this break. Stay with us.